Welcome to the C4 Metro Subcommittee. It's November 16, and Commissioner Savas, this meeting is yours.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I know we know each other, so we'll forego any introductions. And I am struggling a little bit with the technology here at the Graduate Hotel in Eugene. So usually I have a really good internet connection. The last time I did this, the connection was poor, so I cut out. So just let me know. And first order of business is our JPACT regional mobility update. And I guess we have Kim Ellis with us again. Good morning, and Glenn. So take it away, I guess.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Savas. So I'm going to share my screen and just give a brief overview of the work that is coming before JPACT tomorrow morning for recommendation to move forward to begin working to integrate it into the regional transportation plan. But just to start, as a reminder, we have been to you several times throughout the process of developing this policy, but this was a joint project of Metro and ODOT that came out of the 2018 Regional Transportation Plan. And the purpose of the project was to develop new ways for how we're defining and measuring mobility for the Portland area transportation system. The current policy that's in place has been in place on an interim basis for 2 decades, more than 2 decades now. And it lives in the Oregon Highway Plan and Policy 1F, but also the Regional Transportation Plan. And so the draft policy that is coming to JPAC tomorrow, we know needs some additional work to integrate it into the RTP, but it is going to result in amendments to both the RTP and the Oregon Highway Plan as it gets finalized. The RTP portion of that would be as part of adoption of the RTP, the 2023 Regional Transportation Plan next year, and then following that would be considered by the Oregon Transportation Commission. This highlights the timeline. We've been doing this work for over 3 years together. It's been a lot of technical work, a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of research. So what is coming to JPAC tomorrow is, and I'll highlight the actual recommendation from the Transportation Policy Alternatives Committee, is to bring this draft policy forward for further testing and refinement. And we've laid out an action plan of next steps of the work that we'll do as part of the Regional Transportation Plan update, but then there's other work happening at the state level that also will be happening concurrent with that. The reason that an update to the policy was identified in the RTP is that it was increasingly the current policy was really not helping support some of the land use and transportation decision making that's happening in our region. It was sometimes a barrier to achieving some of the housing and employment development that have been identified in local plans. It didn't account for how other ways of traveling. It focused on vehicle travel, but not the other ways that people travel, whether they're walking, biking, taking transit. And it is also transitioning to not just the amount of vehicles going through the system, but really thinking about safe, efficient, and reliable travel. So just thinking about mobility in a much more comprehensive way, and in a way that I think better aligns with state goals, regional goals, as well as local community values and goals. The policy and this draft that is being brought forward to JPACT, the draft policy would apply to transportation system plans. So any city or county transportation system plan or other long-range plans that you might do for areas, concept planning for urban reserves, for example. And then also it would apply to comprehensive plan amendments. So at the system plan level, you're defining sort of your vision and goals for the whole area that is subject to that planning effort. For plan amendments, when a local government is contemplating comprehensive land use change, There's under the transportation planning rule, there's traffic analysis that's required to demonstrate that that change in land use is not going to make the transportation system out of balance. And if it is, then you have to address that. And so this policy, again, would have a more comprehensive way of looking at the changes to comprehensive plans to not just be vehicle focused, but on that broader mobility. This is a chart here is the current policy that's been in place. One thing that as we've had discussions that we've understood that there are some confusion about what even the current policy is, but this policy that was adopted 2 decades ago really allowed for a 2-hour peak and morning and evening peak, so a 4-hour period of the day, where we expected that the system for vehicles was going to be congested. We were a growing region, we have been a growing region, but the idea being that for the 2-hour morning peak and a 2-hour evening peak, acknowledge that congestion and work to provide options around that. But trying to also at the same time preserve freight mobility. So really, acknowledging that we can't eliminate congestion; it's going to be here, but to try and limit it to that 4-hour period, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the peak. And that's something that is similar to the reliability measure that has also been developed. So I just wanted to highlight that. This highlights just a lot of the deep work, extensive discussions that really helped shape the policy all along the way. We started with more than 100 different measures. Last year, we worked on defining the elements that were most important to include or address within the policy and narrowed down from 38 to 17, and then eventually 12 measures that we did more evaluation of. And then the measures that are recommended in this draft policy, we've narrowed down to 3. And then and have draft policies that we would be integrating into the regional transportation plan, and then an implementation action plan that really maps out further work, because this is a big change. It's a big deal for us to be shifting, and it is going to take efforts at the state, regional, and local level to implement it, and it's going to create change in just how we do our evaluation work, our guidelines that are state guidelines and other things that I'll highlight. But these are the 6 elements that the policy is trying to get to: equity, accessibility, efficiency, reliability, safety, and travel options. There's a vision statement that was in there. And this policy, I think it's also important to remind ourselves, is one of many policies. And it needs to support all of the RTP goals. The draft goals for the 2023 RTP are there in the middle of that diagram. And this policy does that. It's supporting those goals in very tangible, meaningful ways. And helping expand, how we're thinking about mobility. These are the draft policy statements. They were included in the JPACT packet. I won't read through them, but essentially all of those 6 elements are reflected in these, and then the 3 measures are listed in the last policy. And these are the 3 measures. So, we're trying to ensure that we're having an efficient land use and transportation system, a complete multimodal system. So that's for all modes. And it also includes system management and demand management as part of that transportation system. And then the 3rd measure is focused on trying to get to a reliable system. And this is so on the land use and transportation efficiency, it's relying on the vehicle miles traveled per capita measure and the targets that have been set by the state for our region to meet for greenhouse gas reduction. Under the transportation planning rule amendments that were adopted earlier this year, our region has sort of a sliding, has these 20% reduction by 2035, 25% by 2040, 30% by 2045, all the way up to 35% reduction in 2050. And while they're expressed as a greenhouse gas emissions reduction for our region under the TPR. We measure out as a VMT per capita. That was the amendment that was adopted earlier this year. And so this aligns us, our region, and local governments in meeting those requirements by establishing this as sort of the primary measure. The system completeness is something that is defined in each TSP and in the regional transportation plan. And so in that work, you would be defining what that planned network for transportation for all modes of the system and be making progress towards implementing that. And then the hours of congestion measure that's trying to get at reliability. What this is focused on are just the throughways designated in the RTP, which are largely the interstates, but there are other routes that we'll need to continue looking at in the RTP. But for those facilities, what it's saying is that for no more than 4 hours per day, that those facilities should be operating at a minimum of 35 miles an hour. We've had challenges in how we describe that, and we can continue to work on better communicating that. But essentially, similar to the current policy that allowed 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, this is saying for a 4 hour period of the day, up to that 4 hours. And then for those unsignalized or signalized throughways, so an example of that would be Highway 224 between Milwaukee and I-205, that the speed should not fall below 20 miles per hour for more than 4 hours per day. This is a high-level overview of the action plan. So, this really, this project has really been the start of a lot of other work that will be happening, not just through the regional transportation plan, but at the state level as well. And it really does, not only is it going to be changing our planning practices and sort of the things that are done at each government level, but it's also going to direct how data and the tools that are needed really to support us in the decision making and the analysis going forward. And that work will continue into the future. I also want to acknowledge that this policy really is at the intersection of many other efforts that are happening. So not just the regional transportation plan that's underway in our region, but ODOT is updating the Oregon Transportation Plan right now. They will begin updating the Oregon Highway Plan next year. And all of that is going to be also working to implement the climate-friendly equitable communities rulemaking that was adopted earlier this year. So there's a lot of overlap in activities, and that will be continuing to develop or implement each of these in a comprehensive way, coordinated way. And some of the details of that are still to be determined. So this is the recommendation coming to JPAC tomorrow that TPAC made, and it is to further develop the draft measures and targets to understand the implications of the current and proposed measures by testing and refining during the RTP system analysis next year. So that'll be early next spring. And then to develop a clear and inclusive mobility corridor-based approach for identifying needs and solutions as part of the RDP update. And with that, I'll stop. These are the key dates. Tomorrow's JPAC will consider action on TPAC's recommendation. Metro Council is actually, my date was moved to December 8th, so it has been pushed out a week from that December 1st date. And then we'll continue working with the technical committees and others to test and refine the policy and measures as part of the RTP update next year. And just to be really direct, this is not final action on the policy, but really consensus to carry it forward into the RTP work next year to finalize it for consideration by JPACT and the Metro Council at the end of next year. So I will stop there and turn it over to you, Commissioner Savas.
Sure. Well, thank you, Kim. And we're all friends here, so I mean no harm to anyone. I respect everyone in our meeting here this morning, but I'm kind of concerned. I know for years, I know there's a number of people that have identified, that what we have in our TSPs and our RTP is something. It's even if you include the financially constrained list of projects, that it's something that's really not practically achievable because there's no resources there to build it. And from the lens of our local roads or our corridors or interstates or our transit service or our trails, bikeways, sidewalks, that system completeness is something that it's just far out there, out of reach often. So I'm just wondering how, if we don't get to system completeness anywhere in, let's just say, the next 10 years or 20 years, are these measures, is there a backup plan? Because I'm kind of concerned that what we're left with is constraints and obligations that aren't going to be congruent with all the other policies, land use policies. And so we have this perhaps a ineffective expenditure in investments if we don't have the complete package to make it work. So can you touch on that a little bit, Kim?
Sure, and I'll invite Glenn to also respond. I think the point you're raising, Commissioner Savas, is it's important that we aren't completing the system in the ways that we want to and that we need to. I think that the current policy doesn't help us do that either. So I think one thing is that our current policy isn't supporting us in decision making, and this is trying to think about it in a more comprehensive way and to think about what are the things we want and need to have for our transportation system to achieve the goals. And it will take action to raise money, to make choices, try and continue to try and do more with the resources that we have to build out all parts of the system. So I think that it's an important question that you're asking, but it's not, the backup plan, is to continue to work to achieve the things that we want to achieve as a region and as communities, and find resources, work together to do that, and to make decisions to advance building out the system, because we need to build that system, and it is taking a long time. I don't know, Glenn, if there's any thought.
Yeah, just add in just real quick. You're absolutely right. I mean, we are not on the funding side of things, but I would like to think that by doing a better job, which I think this policy recommendations do, doing a better job of identifying needs, we can help policymakers, legislators, everyone understand what needs to be, where the investments need to be. And I think you'll see when you look at that the VC standard and the regional travel demand model did not show what people feel when they drive in terms of where the congestion is located very well. That's just some modeling limitations. It's kind of one of those things, but I think you'll see here that we are doing a better job of identifying those areas. And so there's a better logic path there, I think, to having that funding discussion. You're absolutely right on the system completeness stuff. It's very difficult when we have built environments. It's super important when we're doing UGB expansion areas, obviously, because we do have greenfields there, and Oregon City has some good examples of the Beaver Creek areas all been planned out and ready to go, with that kind of stuff in mind. One thing I also wanted to mention is the land use side of things that Kim alluded to earlier. And one example I can give you is Lake Oswego. When I was a consultant years ago, Lake Oswego was working on the Foothills development, trying to expand their downtown to the Foothills area, and the VC ratio on Highway 43 was a significant barrier. And I would say that mobility target kept that area from growing. I think that the city would probably agree. One of the many factors, the streetcar was a significant part of that as well. But this changing these standards removes that barrier to what I would say development in the right place. So growing housing, growing jobs in the places that make a lot of sense. This helps us on that. So there's multiple sides of this. I just want to mention that one.
Okay. So what is the what's the guiding star? I mean, I know that, you know, the our greenhouse gas contribution or reduction is probably what the most important guiding star is. Would we say that? Or what would be close? What would be number 1 and 2 and 3 or a guiding star?
I'm going to
Well, I
say that's
think-
for the policymakers, really. I mean, that's what you do at JPACT is you have to weigh all of those important issues. And I think, you know, we as staff are trying to bring the data and bring the science in. Science, it's, you know, it's modeling and whatnot. But so you guys are able to, y'all are able to make those informed decisions and talk about those trade-offs, because it is a world of trade-offs.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm very, I mean, I've been following the air quality aspects of this my entire career. And I've watched and expect and to see a continuance of really a net zero. I mean, there won't be even tailpipes in the future, in my opinion, you know, with all the advent of hydrogen and electrification. I really think the day is going to be out there when that will be reduced significantly, where transportation is making a less of a contribution, and perhaps it'll be other aspects of greenhouse gas that we need to somehow control. But I'm just kind of concerned about how we, you know, what our plan is, you know, between now and then, that makes our world more affordable. And I'm just watching ourselves making housing, making the cost of living higher and higher, worse so in the metro area than anywhere else, causing people to be displaced and move outside the area. That we're not factoring in the commute shed. The population in where we are here in Eugene has grown 200,000 people since I left. I mean, that was twice the population of what was when I left here. So the population of Lane County is almost that of Clackamas County. It's like 375,000, I believe. So the other parts of the state are growing significantly, and people are driving in every day. And anyone who's anywhere near the Boone Bridge, almost any day of the hour, any hour of the day, that is, can see how much congestion is coming in north and south, and let alone the I-5 bridge from Clark County. So clearly, you know, the housing is cheaper elsewhere, and it seems we're not really factoring that into the plans. I've talked a lot, so I see Mr. Myers, you're up.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. My perspective on these issues generally is from the rural and unincorporated areas, which both exist within and without the UGB and Metro's area and jurisdiction. We're talking this morning about a regional plan. I want to know, what is the definition of that region? Is it the 3 counties in total? In other words, does that include the unincorporated areas in any way? Or is it just within Metro's bailiwick, just within the UGB or the area that it has jurisdiction over? I want to say in this comment, the thing that I've become most recently focused on is really the rub between the urban and the rural areas, the line of the UGB. And I'm wondering whether you are just simply planning for within your area, or whether you're bringing in the other areas into these discussions and to make it into a truly regional plan. Thank you.
I'm going to start, Kim, and then you explain how all the model here works. But from a standpoint of where policies apply, we currently, in the Oregon Highway Plan, we have a differing set of standards, basically a lower congestion standard, allowing more congestion in the Portland metro area that's in the Oregon Highway Plan, simply because we recognize that it is different than the rest of the state. And so we can't fix it all. So from a regulatory standpoint, when my team at ODOT works on a transportation system plan, when we're working with Canby and working with Sandy, we're using the statewide Oregon Highway Plan policies. When we're working in Beaverton, Milwaukee, we're using the metro area stuff that's in the RTP, the standards in the RTP. So from a regulatory standpoint, there's a split. But Kim will talk about how the modeling looks at a much larger area.
Yeah, so within this policy, by being amended in the RTP, will be for the area that's within Metro's metropolitan planning area responsibility. But as Glenn said, our analysis area actually extends outside of that. So it is accounting for travel that is coming from outside the region and into the region. So it is accounting for that travel by whether it's by transit or motor vehicle travel in particular. So and then I would say just in terms of the policy itself, the highway plan is going to be undergoing an update next year. And so the work that we've been doing here will be informing that, in addition to the specific policies in the highway plan for our region that have already been adopted.
I just want to say, I don't know what your outreach then is to the areas outside of Metro, if those are being taken into consideration. How are you reaching out to those communities or those individuals, those citizens, and how's that?
Yeah, we're accounting for the travel, but that is not part of our planning responsibility. That's really the responsibility of ODOT, in the Region 1 Act, and that table for thinking about, sort of that broader area that is within Region 1, and that's not Metro's responsibility for planning. That's outside our authority. That's outside our responsibility.
Maybe direct me where I would go then. What I'm specifically interested in is the situation where there would be a development, subdivision or some other type of density development immediately on the border of the UGB and Metro's jurisdiction that uses as its ingress and egress rural roads that are located outside of the UGB.
Yeah, so that would be
just simply ignore that. I mean, one example is the Frog Pond division outside of Wilsonville, how it dumps onto Stafford. Stafford's a rural road. It's the county's responsibility. And the situation has created a dangerous case for travelers. So where's Metro on things like that? And I must say also, I'm looking at this from the Redland perspective too. Thank you.
So I'm gonna just jump in real quick and say the county's transportation system plan, I haven't looked at for a while, will have addressed those, it will have modeled and have a plan for the growth related to comprehensive plan changes in the Frog Pond area. That's in the UGB. But we do see a lot of growth in Donald, Aurora, Canby, North Plains, Banks. And as Commissioner Savas mentioned, I mean, housing prices are a huge contributing factor to that. That's one of the reasons, as I mentioned with my earlier example, but I can look at many, that changing the policy for these urban areas, the centers, removing that VC standard is going to help us with housing production. It's one of our significant goals here. We're trying to get so that when we're reviewing plan changes, when the right development, the right kind of place, we don't have to worry about, oh, this one intersection might be a problem. When the reality is they're on a transit corridor, it's near downtown, it's near jobs, it's near dry cleaners, all those kind of things. That's what we're trying to make easier to do on the market side.
Yeah. I guess I somewhat equate really, Martin, your question, not that dissimilar to, the article I just read by Representative McLean and Mr. Byers, when it came to the congestion pricing or tolling, and that, they project that the interstates that are tolled will be, congestion will be reduced. And really what it is, my analogy there, not an exact science, but the analogy there is that the people that are displaced off the freeways are going to be on our local roads. It's going to compound the problem that we're talking about, and yet they'll be able to declare, maybe they will, maybe they're right. They'll declare, geez, look at the congestion on the highways. It's now reduced, and we're meeting all of our goals. Well, not really true when you're actually displacing it, because people aren't going to avoid those roads because they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to pay the toll, or whatever the reason may be. And yet, we are displacing people into a more CO2 producing environment than they would be otherwise on a smooth, well-designed system had, a constant speed of 35 or 40 miles an hour, be accommodated. So that's my concern, is that we are displacing it. And the disproportionate part that I think is even a bigger issue with the rural area that Mr. Myers is speaking to is that the funding streams for those are pretty nil. There's not much there. And if this region is going to just not, monitor it and recognize it. But again, I understand maybe there's not a responsibility there for it. But if there's not a means to remedy it with resources, then I think we have to look at this more holistically at a state level. I'm not sure that the metro vision on this for this part of the state is adequate enough. That's my commentary. Councillor Lewis.
Sure, two things. First, I want to ask a clarifying question that might help Martin with his quandary. And then I also heard earlier the unanswered question of what is a North Star, and I wanted to offer what mine is in this policy. So first, this is a very specific urban highway measurement. So let me get this right. Is there an urban highway that this would apply to that is in an undeveloped outside the UGB area?
No.
I don't know the definition of highway. Are you saying?
It's an ODOT highway.
No, I think I'm talking county. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this would not apply. It would be up to the county into how they applied this policy for their facilities.
So Highway 212, Highway 99E, Highway 213, all of those are both urban and rural, in and outside the UGB. Really depends on where you draw the line at. So the consequences, I've been stuck on 212. A 5 mile backup is not uncommon. At certain hours of the day, have a 5+ mile backup. Not uncommon in 213. Not uncommon at 99E to Canby. Both, again, that goes all the way to Portland. 99E is a long state highway, but it transcends both UGB, in and out.
I think the follow-up answer is this policy will affect the urban portion of 99E, but it will not affect 99E south of Oregon City.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's the clarifying answer I was asking for. And I think that Commissioner Savas, you just pointed out that the traffic flows across that arbitrary line, obviously, but it is not a policy that is going to be affecting the road throughway and Canby. It is going to be affecting Oregon City and all the way up until Milwaukee. And I think that's getting at what this North Star is, that we will start to measure how our roads perform by how they move people and stuff in all directions, and not just a simple linear measurement of vehicles. So both 43 and 99 have the measurements of people who need to get across as well as through. And right now we're completely failing on any measurement of people who need to interact with that road, essentially perpendicular to the way that throughput is currently measured. And additionally, we're not really measuring for people, we're just measuring for number of vehicles. So that's the really significant shift in the North Star that is guiding this principle in my mind, which is we're moving towards people and stuff need to move, not just number of tires on the road.
Okay, Councillor Linville. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. And thank you. Also, I appreciate the comments, both that Commissioner Savas you have made, as well as Mr. Myers. And so one of the things I wondered is, and I recognize from this last just immediate from Councillor Lewis about the parameters within the policy, but I'm wondering if we're really going to be addressing solutions and remedies within the RTP, that one of the guiding principles or the guidelines, in addition to the goals that we've identified, I wonder if coordination ought to be one of them, just simply because finding a strategy for a problem that exists within the boundaries of the jurisdiction of the policy it may not be the correct strategy if it doesn't include coordination, at least coordination as a principle as policy is being made. And so I would wonder if that would not be one of the possibilities of having as one of the operating goals.
So the RTP goals, I think, is what you're referring to. And those are sort of outcomes-based goals. They're when we update and develop the regional transportation plan and identify priorities for investment, when local transportation system plans are developed as well, there's a lot of coordination of that are helping using those goals to, and these measures in particular would be helping to identify where there are needs for addressing mobility on the system. And then as those system plans are being developed either at the local level and at the RTP level, coordination is happening on how best to meet those needs within the resources that we have. And it is looking at transit, it's looking at walking and biking connections. Are there system management strategies that can be deployed, demand management and road capacity as well as part of that. So that happens as part of the planning process. That's like an underlying value of the planning process is that coordination. And yeah, we operate under federal law for the RTP, that there's it's continuing, cooperative, and coordinated. So that is sort of a fundamental process, goal and principle that we do operate under.
Yeah, I know this is a really difficult conversation. And I know we're all friends. We all have respect for one another here. And it just seems that what I'm really hearing in general, I appreciate Councilor Lewis's comments that, we're not going to meet the measurements. We're going to fail. And to Councilor Linville's point about coordination, perhaps if we know we're going to fail, then, how do we coordinate in going on for the next, there ought to be the backup plan I was referring to. What is the backup plan? How are we going to do this so there's not a disproportionate burden on certain areas? And as we make investments in the area, my concern is that the areas that need the most resources are not seeing those investments, that are held closely in. Now I'm not at all disputing safety. It's, transportation safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, cars, everyone. I'm not challenging that at all, but there are a lot of issues outside the region or out on the edges or in the less metropolitan area portions of this region, the metro boundaries, that are not seeing the same level of investment in our transportation system. And it seems that we ought to be spreading that out, and there's more investment being made within, again, these tighter areas than there are on the edges. And maybe, I know that's not exactly, it's not black and white. I know there's areas and we're making investments in some other corridors, but the proportionate share, I mean, look where the investments are today and look where they are not. And I think the evidence is not anything to argue about. I mean, it is what it is. We know where transit systems are. We know where they are very scarce. We know where there are road miles and where there are not. We know where there is a grid system, where there is not. We know where bike ped trail systems are and where they are not. So it's really nothing to argue about or dispute. Is how we make it as effective as possible going forward. And in a system we know we're not going to meet, we're going to fail. That part, I think, is something that we have to come to grips with. Mr. Brashear.
Good morning. Thank you. Mine is really just a minor kind of, I guess, request, if you will. We concern ourselves now with, equity and those type of things. And when I, in the almost 6 years that I've been here, and I look at the Metro documents, and you talk about the metro planning area and the concern with travel from outside of the metro planning area into the metro planning area. It's an optics thing for me. I represent a group of small providers, which includes Sandy, Canby, South Clackamas Transit District, and then Clackamas County that runs the Mount Hood Express and some other shuttles. I guess my request is that in your documents, if you only show TriMet, then everyone believes that that's the only transit that exists in the Tri-County area, when there are actually a number of others. So I would just ask for equal time. I can send you a whole library of photos, and certainly could get the other small providers to do the same. I just think it's fair to display a true regional approach when you talk about transit. When you talk about roads and bridges and all that, I have no say or concern about that, but transit is more than just the MAX line or the FX line, which are all great. But we do exist. There are other transit providers that are working extremely hard in the region to provide transit that connects with TriMet. So maybe showing those connections would be helpful. So it's an optics thing for me. But
yeah, I appreciate that, Dwight. And they obviously are a very important part of the overall transportation system, because while they may not be carrying as many people, they're providing important transportation option for people coming into and out of the region. And so yes, thank you for raising that.
Okay, so I guess our next agenda item is slightly related. I'd like to keep that in mind. I guess this call for projects piece, and just keep in mind our discussion we're having right now as we talk about those projects and think about that. So Kim, you want to take that on next?
Yeah, so yes, thank you. Double duty. You all will be tired of me. Yes, as you know, the regional transportation plan update, a key part of that update, in addition to talking about what is it we're trying to achieve, our goals for the system and outcomes that we're trying to get to, what are the investment priorities for the region. And so tomorrow at JPACT, JPACT will begin talking about the call for projects, and I'm going to today give an overview of that policy framework and the process, because we are relying on the coordinating committees to identify priorities, in addition to agencies such as SMART and TriMet and ODOT and the Port of Portland, to see if you have questions, and just want to help you understand sort of the process and your role in it. And then we are still developing the draft forecast. We hope to have more information to share tomorrow, but I'll just go through what we have. So the update to the RTP, we've been doing a lot of work this year, again, around the vision and goals, policy discussions around congestion pricing, this mobility policy work, also climate smart, we will be updating, and the high capacity transit strategy as well. More recently, Elliott Rose has been reporting on some of the needs, some of which Commissioner Savas was highlighting, that we know where there is a lack of or gaps in our transportation system, or areas where our system's deficient, and so those really become a basis for identifying the needs for the future. This plan will go out to the year 2045, and so next January we'll be initiating the call for projects. Just one thing I want to highlight is that under federal law, we need to complete the update by December 6th of next year, which is essentially the end of November, in time to meet that federal deadline. So this highlights those different elements, the policies, the revenue forecast, and needs analysis that are feeding into what we'll be asking JPACT and the Metro Council to provide direction on moving forward to the call for projects. That will be happening from January 6th to February 17th, but the staff and your coordinating committee or your jurisdictions have already begun working and talking about this and getting organized as they are in the other parts of the region. So well in advance of January 6th to start identifying what are those priorities. These are the 5 goal areas that have been developed by JPACT and the Metro Council this year that this RTP will be focusing on, and equity, climate, safety, mobility, as well as a thriving economy. And that is a central part. We also have updated some of the policy maps around the equity focus areas, which are areas priority for investment to advance equity. And that's areas of concentration of people of color, people with low income, and people with limited English proficiency. We've also done work to identify areas of the region or corridors in the region that have higher high injury corridors and intersections that are really the places where the most fatal and serious injury crashes are occurring, and the safety needs. These are priority areas for safety, in addition to areas that may be identified in local plans and state plans. We also have in the RTP a designated network for each mode. And so those all together with these different policy topics will be informing us as we work together to update the investment priorities for the 2023 RTP. This highlights some of those gaps in the system, and there are gaps in all parts of the transportation system, as Elliot Rose's work has highlighted. And we'll be making this information available to our local partners and others as they begin looking at their current projects in the RTP. We will be working through the coordinating committees, really having you identify your priorities for the regional transportation system based on a budget that'll be developed or cost targets that'll be developed out of that revenue forecast. Next spring, after the close of the call for projects, we will be going into an evaluation phase. We will be doing a high-level assessment of the project list against those goals, as well as a more detailed system analysis that's going to be looking at some of those broader transportation performance measures, some of which were raised in the discussion in the earlier presentation. We will start engaging with policymakers and the public on that project list assessment in the spring, while the system analysis will keep, because that always takes longer. It's just a lot of technical work to do that modeling, to then have a discussion about how well do these priorities meet the goals and objectives of the RTP. There may be refinements based on what we learn through that engagement, as well as the technical analysis. And the next spring, in June, JPACT and the council will provide direction on finalizing the plan for a public review. So late next summer, we'll be going through a formal public review of the draft plan and the project priorities to work towards finalizing the plan for JPACT and Metro Council consideration by the end of next year. Just in terms of that process, I just want to remind many folks, many of you, I think, were part of the last RTP update. But just as a reminder, we have, so the revenue forecast that we developed is basically what's called a financially constrained revenue forecast. And so we'll develop a project list that balances with the revenues that we expect to have available. And it includes local sources of revenue, it includes state and federal sources. TriMet has funding sources that are some federal, but payroll tax and other pieces, and as well as SMART will be part of that revenue forecast. We also create a list of additional priorities that the region agrees are important to work together to advance, but they don't fit within that financially constrained budget. And just to continue to emphasize, we are looking to the coordinating committees to really identify, review the current plan projects and identify what changes or new projects should be considered as part of this process within those cost targets. Projects come from many places. They are from local adopted system plans, concept plans, comprehensive plans, your capital improvement programs, the legislature. So they essentially they come from many different sources that have been through a public process, and that allows opportunities for public input, that we are really looking at what are the needs and what are the priorities for addressing those needs based on those public processes. To be eligible to come into the RTP, it needs to come from an adopted plan or a process that had opportunities for public input. It needs to be located inside the metropolitan planning area boundary. So that's a federal designation in our area of responsibility. And it needs to be located on one of the RTP network maps or designations. Also, projects need to be a minimum of $2 million in cost, or be bundled with other similar projects to meet that cost threshold. We are asking that through the coordinating process, not only are you identifying your priorities and coordinating them and asking ODOT, TriMet, and SMART to participate in your discussions as well, but to have the coordinating committee submit a letter. This is what has happened in past RTP updates, basically endorsing the set of projects for that constrained level and that strategic level that you want forwarded to the RTP. We are, just to be clear, we are starting with the current projects in the 2018 RTP as a starting point. And that's part of the work that your staff are doing now, is reviewing what's in there, to bring that information forward for your discussion. Also, local governments, or each agency, for the projects that are submitted by each agency, there's a checklist to document public engagement. And then we have what's called a Project Hub, which stores, it's a database of the current RTP projects. It has information that will help support that outcome-based analysis that I spoke to earlier. And so new information for new projects would need to be brought into that database to support that. These are draft sort of questions that have been developed that we're going to continue working with TPAC to bring forward to JPACT next month. But the kinds of questions that we'll be looking to answer as part of that high-level project assessment, but also as part of the system analysis across those 5 goal areas within the plan. And this just gives a little bit more specificity around that coordinated list of priorities for the city and county projects. And it's while we have a constrained list and a strategic list, that constrained list is broken up into 2 time periods. The first 7 years of the plan, so it would be basically 2023 to 2030, and then the outer years of the plan period from 2031 to 2045, and then the strategic list, which would be sort of in that same outer time period, 2031 to 2045. And each of these, for each coordinating committee and the cities within the county, there will be a cost target for each of these 3 different buckets that'll be provided. So cities and counties play an important role in this, in addition to working within the coordinating committees, but there are projects that come from the local plans that are part of the regional transportation plan. And so they are starting to review that information now. They'll be responsible for updating the project information for their jurisdiction, as well as submitting the public engagement documentation. And then new for this regional transportation update, we are also asking for jurisdictions to submit an endorsement letter from their governing body. So in the case of a city, it would be the city council. In the case of the counties, the county board, basically, endorsing the priorities that are submitted on behalf of the jurisdiction to ensure that policymakers are having an opportunity to help shape what's being submitted to the regional transportation plan. These are some of the key dates. We will formally begin the call, but there's work happening now to lead up to that January 6th. And January 27th, we are asking the staff to provide Metro with a draft list of the projects, knowing that there's still work to be done, at the jurisdictional level, but also through the coordinating committees. But to just have a sense of what changes are being contemplated. But then all of the information will need to be submitted by February 17th. And then next spring, we will be conducting the analysis that I described earlier. We'll begin seeking input. We're trying to seek input on the draft list much earlier in the process to have that help inform the technical analysis and the findings from the engagement and the technical work will be reported back to the Metro Council, the regional committees, including the county coordinating committees. And then the letter of endorsement that I mentioned from the governing bodies, that would not be due until May. We're concerned about the ability to be able to do that by February 17th, particularly with some of the changes in leadership and different city councils and such. And then next May and June, JPACT and the Metro Council will be considering all of the input and analysis to provide staff with direction to finalize the draft plan for further public review. So I will stop there and open it up for questions.
Okay, Mr. Meyer.
A lot of information.
Thank you again for a nice presentation. In the previous presentation, I learned that the plan will not take into consideration anything outside of the UGB, Metro's Bailiwick. And now I'm learning that none of the money, the RTPs, can be spent outside of the UGB or Metro's Bailiwick. I think the term regional used for both of these plans is ambiguous. It's kind of in the eye of the beholder, and I can see where Metro sees this as a regional plan. From out here outside of Metro, it doesn't make any sense. It's not just ambiguous, it's misleading, because I hear regional, I think, well, I must be involved with that. Redland Road, which goes in through the UGB and is the main corridor for my entire area, the Highland area, Estacada, Beaver Creek, all these areas. It had a 5-hour backup during the last wildfire on Redland Road. I think I'm part of the region, but I realize I'm not. We aren't out here. I think what MPAC should be proposing to Metro is to change the name of both of these programs, the policy and the plan. It's not regional. It's UGB, it's Metro, it's only that. I'm sorry, I'm offended by that very bright line that's being drawn here. And I think you guys are being misleading in just your caption. And again, I don't mean any respect. I'm a volunteer. I don't have a staff. I don't have anybody to tell me about these things. All I can ask is questions and to hear what people are telling me. And regional doesn't make any sense. It's not what you're doing. Thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, my direct response to that is the Metropolitan Planning Organization is what we're acting as right now. And that is a boundary that has definition through federal statute and is analogous to MPOs across the country. And if we wanted to call this the MPO RTP, that works for me. But when we're talking about what's included and what's not included, this is not new. This is not something that we've decided here locally. So I just wanted to kind of counter with the idea that this is metropolitan. This is about urbanization. And yes, we need to be in coordination and communication with the areas just on the other side of what can feel like an arbitrary or imaginary line. And that is exactly the work of this meeting right here. So I'm glad we're in coordination and communication. But I'm not going to back down from regional, because that's what we're doing as the MPO, is we are going across the region in the urbanized areas of 3 counties, 24 cities. So I guess I'm wondering why this is coming up now. We've been talking about this for a year. And if this is the first time you're having this realization, I'm a little struck. We did talk about this. What should we describe the vision as? Because a lot of people don't know if they live in Metro or not. A lot of people don't know what county they live in even. So the very first vision statement workshop, how do we describe where we are? We don't want to say people who live around Portland, because that puts the center on Portland. We don't want to say the 3 county area, because which 3 counties? So how do we describe what the MPO is? I'm open to that. But the boundary here is really well defined and is not going anywhere.
I appreciate that, and I understand, and I am in entire agreement. And if I've been remiss in not bringing this up a year ago, I apologize for that. It's only with the acceptance of option 3 on the UGB land swap that this has all come to a focus for me. I just think the term's ambiguous, and from outside of the UGB, you think you're part of the region, but you're not. So, and if we're going to talk about these bright lines, then we need to be drawing them and using the right vernacular. That's all. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Lewis, I appreciate your comments, and I have a while back when I first got on JPACT, I start looking around, and my role in NACO, the National Association of Counties, on the Transportation Committee, and talking to other representatives from other MPOs around the country. We're unique. And I'm not saying we're doing it wrong. I'm not saying we're doing it right, but we're unique. And the MPO boundaries have a relationship to really getting the air quality attainment. And we have been in attainment for a number of years based on a very old system of a few different byproducts of exhaust. CO2 actually was not one of those, actually. So we've been in containment or attainment, and we still are. And we have now a global problem where the CO2 that we're challenged with, reductions we're challenged with, is not a local thing. It does not have local impact so much as it has a global impact. So it's a different animal altogether. And how those are established, and how the MPOs are established, and how the MPOs work today. I would argue that there's MPOs around the country that are a lot more sensitive to the commute shed. And, the word regional, semantics, but the word regional is not in the MPO. It's presumed, but the situation we have here, and whether it's our land use policies that say, we've got this imaginary line called the urban growth boundary. And, the consequence of that today is that the price of housing, or the price of dirt, the land underneath it, is so exorbitant that people are moving farther away. We're defeating our own purpose, I think, and our own goals. And I just think that the paradigm that we're operating in, I've said this for 15 years, the paradigm we're operating in is not meeting the mark. And unfortunately, there's people on the street right now that are a consequence of a faulted paradigm. Mayor Buck.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. So one question and just a point to Mr. Myers, that the jurisdictional issues, are just confusing in general to neighbors, and to Councilor Lewis's point. I live within the city of Lake Oswego, obviously in Clackamas County. My neighbor is my next door neighbor is in unincorporated Clackamas County. So I abide by different land use rules than the person who lives directly adjacent to me. And so it's confusing, right? In general, it is confusing. We have, and it's just a part of living in a region with different cities, counties, and the metro overlay. So I appreciate what Mr. Myers is saying, but it's something even on a daily basis. We have people who they are within the school boundaries of our Lake Oswego School District, but outside the city, they have an address on an envelope to their house that says they reside in Lake Oswego, but they're not in the city. They live in the county, and people are confused by this on a daily basis. Okay. And it's kind of our job as leaders to help inform people and how these the boundaries and the jurisdictions, we even have people run for office in the city only to learn that they don't actually live in the city, so they say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I've been here for 20 years and I didn't realize I actually don't live in the city of Lake Oswego. I thought I did. Okay. So my other question for Kim, is there, in terms of the list of projects, is there kind of a carryover list that,
Yeah.
goes from one, and can you give us an idea, like just practically speaking, I mean, if for people in LO, when we talk about the or any jurisdiction, the call for projects, how do projects kind of get carried over, and how does this work here influence the update to our local transportation system plans that some of us will be doing?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. So yes, so we have a list that was adopted of investment priorities that was adopted back in 2018. It contains nearly 1,000 projects all across the region. Each city, with the exception of a few very small cities like Maywood Park, for example, does not have projects in there. But there's projects we have, and I can share this with Trent to send out to the group, but we do have an online map, and that is our starting point. So all of those projects came from transportation system plans, concept plans, other efforts that have already happened since 2018. A lot has changed just, in our region, and that so it's time to review, are these still the right priorities? There's also been planning work that's been completed since 2018. So there have been some transportation plan updates locally. So this is an opportunity for cities or the counties to bring forward new priorities or updated priorities that reflect those more recent planning efforts. But again, starting with the current list, and that information we've shared out to local staff already, and we're trying to set up the systems in place to support them as they're reviewing it and looking at it next to the goals and some of the needs analysis that we've done for the RTP. In terms of how this work will affect local plans, so this is it's always, I would call it iterative. We update the RTP every 5 years under federal law. And so these will be the projects that'll be the priorities eligible. If they're on the financially constrained network, they're eligible for federal and state transportation funding. But local plans will be updated, following the RTP, and there may be new policy, like the new policy, the mobility policy, for example, once adopted in the RTP, that would apply, and local plans would need to be updated to reflect that. Local plans also will need to be updated, not just because of the RTP update, but because of the new climate-friendly equitable communities rules to address those. And some of the work that we're doing through this process will help support the local governments in our region in updating their plans to meet those requirements, to the extent that we are able to do that through the RTP process. So that's it's a little bit of a broad answer, but hopefully that gives you a sense of.
Thank you. Thank you.
Kim, just to keep us on track here, I don't know if you were going to be presenting on this, but we have the JPACT update. Was that Trent? Who was going to?
That's our JPACT team, and I can bring them over right now.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the questions and feedback today.
Yeah, thank you, Kim and Glenn. Was it Glenn?
Yes, Glenn Boland from ODOT.
Thank you both.
All right, Jamie Lorenzini and Karen Bierig from JPACT are here with some additional updates.
Good morning, everyone. And actually, I think the JPACT update can be very short, because at JPACT, we pretty much heard everything that you just heard. So we thought we'd let you hear it from the source. But Jamie, am I remembering that correctly? This is basically what the same information that was covered at JPACT. I think at JPACT tomorrow, you'll also have a more detailed overview of the needs assessment that that Kim was referencing. So there'll be information about that at JPACT tomorrow. So Jamie.
Yeah, great job, Karen. There is one more thing I might highlight. At JPACT tomorrow, you'll be considering an MTIP bundle. And within that bundle, there's kind of an exciting project that you might want to be aware of. Scrolling down. So this project is an ODOT project, and what it's looking to do is to establish National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI, fast charging stations along I-205 from I-5 to the Glen Jackson Bridge to provide electric vehicle drivers with reliable fast charging along major corridors in Oregon. So in keeping with our commitment to climate, this is kind of a cool thing just to be aware of. It'll be coming before you at JPAC. And it's a new project.
Is there, on that note, is there any land use changes that are going to accommodate that? For example, I mean, is there going to be a point where every home will be required to have a charging station, or every business establishment have X amount of charging stations? I mean, is there any accommodation from the land use standpoint?
So I'll answer from my view, is that as a part of the MTIP project, that was not discussed. But I will say from the conversations that were happening around the climate friendly and equitable communities, there have been changes about providing the kind of the conduits, the electricity that's needed to different developments to be able to have electric charging stations. So, and so those will be, I think they're focused on business developments, but it could be all types of developments. I'd have to look closely. That also has, it really is focused in cities and not necessarily in unincorporated areas. And it's not about actually putting the electric vehicle charger stations in, but it's about having the electrical capacity available. So that's my understanding. So it's not necessarily related to the MTIP proposal, which is funding through ODOT to be able to put the actual electric charging stations in, which is different than what happens during development.
Thank you, Karen, for that. There are other MPOs where, in regions and/or whichever verbiage you want to use there, that are making it part and parcel of almost every stop along a highway, restaurants, apartment buildings, so forth, shopping centers where electrical charging stations are required. And if we're going to really be serious about this, I would think that, and maybe Mayor Buck can expand if that's been a discussion at MPAC from a land use standpoint. It just seems part and parcel of the solution. And it kind of strikes me that maybe it's not even being really taken seriously.
No, we have not discussed electric charging from a land use perspective at MPAC.
Okay. Do we know what's the nearest jurisdiction that is? I mean, even if it's 1,000 miles away, I mean, do we know the nearest jurisdiction is actually is requiring that? Have we looked around the country to see what other folks are doing?
I'll just say, I mean, locally, it's a big topic within the city. It's not, there's no mandate on it. It's just something that's happening though, because of the interest. New development is installing electric chargers. We're working around, PGE has pilot programs around pole charging. We're working with multifamily to do retrofitting, EV car share, all of that. But I'd say it's like a new, something we just started talking about probably this last year, the infrastructure bill.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before we shift to our next agenda item, folks? Okay, great. So MPAC updates, I guess, is that correct, Trent?
That's correct. And Commissioner Scholl's attending a different meeting at the conference today, so it would be up to the cities if you want to provide an update on what happened for the November 9 meeting.
Commissioner, do you want me to give an update?
Sure, please.
We had, I mean, the big topic that we discussed at the last meeting was the exchange, the land swap. I think everyone here is aware of the Tigard River Terrace 2.0. And so MPAC just giving a recommendation. We had it over a handful of meetings, whittling down various options. So as the Tigard land comes into the UGB, what land will be removed from the UGB, made into urban reserves. And MPAC voted on a recommendation to remove on land in the Damascus area, primarily, and then a smaller portion of land adjacent to Oregon City that they had wanted removed. So anyway, we kind of, that was the MPAC's final piece on that on that particular topic. And now it goes through, and Councilor Lewis may have more information on that, but you know, it's not said and done. Obviously, the Metro Council has to approve. Its MPAC's making a recommendation on that. And then we continue to discuss the shelter siting, supportive housing services. At our next meeting, we'll be talking about the regional coordination as a piece of that. So we've been hearing from different providers, especially as now we come into the winter. That Commissioner Savas, may you speak to this? I know Clackamas County is considering the use of Project Turnkey grant dollars in the purchase of shelter. So we are, Clackamas County don't have an overnight shelter aside from some family and domestic abuse shelter spaces, but in general. So yeah, those kind of topics have been dominating the impact table this year. Great.
Well, appreciate you mentioning the Project Turnkey, Mayor. And as we discussed at C4 here a week or so ago, it kind of again initiated my plea to you all as city leaders to, what hotels or apartment buildings, because both are eligible for Project Turnkey, perhaps within your cities and jurisdictions. We are finding ourselves where we're not having any takers, and the only areas that we have seemed to be exploring are in the unincorporated area, which is not uncommon in the last 20 or 30 years of my observation when it comes to, what people want in their communities, what they don't want. But it's a significant problem, and the sizable hotels are in cities for the most part, not exclusively, but most of them are. And there's opportunities, and if we have some willingness, maybe from some cities, to be a partner to that, it'd be appreciated. And we made a concerted effort to have the Project Turnkey expanded from hotels to also include apartment buildings or structures where it's actually cheaper, because you can just walk in there day one. They are more turnkey than hotels because they have the kitchens and so forth already. They are living quarters by design, more so. So just my plea to, I know we have a small audience here today, but my plea to you all is a serious consideration of, what might be eligible in your neck of the woods for properties, apartment buildings, hotels that are sizable. We're going to get one bite of the apple, so we're trying to find the biggest one we can. And maybe we've got something, but I think amenities nearby are important. The one we're looking at currently on Project Turnkey is about 50 units, happens to be near an area where there's a lot of services and grocery store, and Fred Meyer's, where there's a number of things other than groceries. So it's appealing because of what's nearby, but yet some of the other ones that we've got in unincorporated don't have a safe means or have those services nearby. So it's going to be very challenging. So just want to put that commentary there. Trent, what else is on our, Mayor Buck?
Well, just thanks, real quick. So the Turnkey, Project Turnkey, I'm confused about the apartment taking permanent housing and converting it to transitional housing.
That's an option. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we had the I won't say the legislation, but Trent, we made that ask and they accommodated, correct, Trent?
That's correct. There are two phases of turnkey. This is turnkey 2.0. The first one happened shortly after the fires, and that one was limited to just hotel purchases. And so those initial turnkey programs were only hotel purchases. But when they were re-upping turnkey for this last legislative session, we were pretty active to be able to include other, I think that's the phrase, other facilities. It's like hotels and or other facilities into the legislation so that we weren't limited to just hotels. We knew from phase 1 or 1.0 that our hotel inventory in Clackamas County had those limitations that Commissioner Savas just mentioned, right? A lot of them in the unincorporated area. We prefer a lot of those opportunities to be closer to services, and the unincorporated area, especially our rural unincorporated areas, don't have a lot of that. So we were pretty keen on that. So it could include things like, an apartment complex, a dormitory, similar to how the Merrillhurst, accommodations are switching. That's within the housing project, but that would have been a similar option, right? Where those dormitories could have been converted in a similar way. So it's not limited to just hotels. And we have some flexibility with some of those options. If you know of a comparable site, for example, we'd be happy to have that conversation.
Okay, I guess I just want to clarify, we're not talking about displacing people in permanent housing to provide for shelter housing. It makes no sense.
Well,
yeah,
and there's an example. I'm sorry, I used to live next to one. There's an example in the city of Portland near the Rose City Golf Course. It's like Halsey and 100 or Halsey and 70, something like that. And there's a pretty large complex there of used to be privately owned apartments. They were purchased by the city, and they have like multi-use, right? Some of them are, I think, turnover sort of units, while some of them are market rate apartments, and they sort of use that to be able to help fund it in the long term. I mean, it's a good example, but there's also like 300 units in that particular example. So it's not the best example, but it was a unique thing that the city of Portland and Multnomah County were able to take advantage of. And that's, I think, to what Commissioner Savas is talking about, where there are a lot of options. A lot of them could be like studio-based options that have that quick turnaround for those people and that quick need. And then you're not, apartment stay is already by nature kind of short, or typically short. So there's natural turnover to be able to integrate it into more uses by something like our housing affordability team would be able to do.
Yeah, and the other, because the hotel model, for example, is transitional, it's not permanent long-term. So let's just say that in our housing authority, when we're expanding on a piece of property and we're building something, we are anticipating transitioning people from their existing tired, somewhat dilapidated, affordable housing units into the newer modern ones, and then tearing down those. But in that interim, we could, there's an example where that could be a transitional, used for transitional purposes temporarily. Also tired apartment buildings that need to be reworked. Maybe they're available for a song that need to be reworked, and it might be affordable or attractive to make that move. So every situation is unique, but I just appreciate the state accommodating that ability to look at everything, look at every opportunity. So let's get us back on track. Trent, where are we? What's next?
Closing remarks, conclusion, whatever we want to do here.
Okay. The floor is open. Anyone? Great. Well, we don't need to sit here for 5 minutes to burn the clock. Oh, Mr. Brashear.
Yeah, I just, looking at the agenda, I just wanted to point out the letter that Wilsonville has submitted as part of the JPACT package. So, and if there were any questions about that, hopefully everybody got a chance to read the letter. It's pretty straightforward, self-explanatory. So, but I'm here if anybody has any questions about that.
Okay. And while I have you all, and I'll just take 1 minute here and say this, that we know that with the elections, that there will be some changes with our group, whether it's C4 Metro or whether it's C4, and perhaps even maybe the cities might want to assign someone new from their city to be their representative for C4. So keep that in mind as we try to transition from this late part of the year to the early next. And wish everyone, well, no perhaps more certainty with some of the election outcomes here soon, but just keep that in mind, and we'll look forward to seeing you all in December. When, Trent? December 2nd, 1st?
That's actually a great segue, because that's the last thing I wanted to comment on. Is that's right, the C4 meeting is on December 1, which is a Thursday, and anytime that the month starts on a Thursday, that means the C4 Metro Subcommittee meeting happens a week early. So next month, December, the C4 Metro Subcommittee meeting will happen on the second Wednesday, December 14. I've decided that in these instances, I will just send a calendar invitation to this group, because I've noticed that it's not, it's easy to miss when we have to do this shift. But this meeting, our sort of the way that when we meet is the day before JPACT. So we're kind of held to whenever the third Thursday is. We meet the day before, and in December that just happens to be the second Wednesday. I know it's weird, so I'll do the calendar invitation to make sure everyone has just that extra little bit tracking for themselves. But and it's also looking like, per the executive committee, that our December 1 C4 meeting will probably be more of a social gathering, and I'm looking for a place to do that. Probably going to be, if I'm lucky, the Willamette neighborhood in West Lynn. There's a cider house with a big open space covered area in the back, and I need to give them a call and see if I can lock that down.
Okay. Well, great. Well, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we stand adjourned. Thank you.